Today it's going to be a slightly different sermon than what I normally do, just slightly. And let me explain. We're in Acts chapter 27. And as I studied this out really over the last 2 weeks, the problem that I'm being faced with is, and it's just me as a teacher preacher, is I don't want to just tell you what it says, and I don't want to just springboard off of a verse and give you some points to consider. What I like to do is teach you what it says or help you discover what it says as you read it along with me, but then bring important things out of it. And really, this is a deeper story than you realize. If we were going through the book of Acts on Wednesday night, I would probably take 4 weeks where we have almost an hour to discuss it just to get through this chapter 27. And because there's so many discussion points that are so good, applicable principles that we see demonstrating how life works, how God works with both believers and unbelievers, and what God does, how he uses believers to protect unbelievers, but how they're still at risk if they don't listen. And there's just all this stuff that's going on. And then it just narrows down to even some sub-points that are in here that I could spend a whole sermon on, that I'm really struggling with how to preach through this, because next week is Mother's Day, the week after that is Youth Sunday, and to try to divide this up in a couple different weeks, it could take too long. So here's the why it's difficult for me. I have no idea how far I'm getting today. Okay, I'm going to let the clock sort of decide that. As far as we get to by a certain time, and within a variation of time. This is not a warning that I'm going longer today. I'm going to try to, but it's just what I've decided, instead of trying to do my outline like I normally do, and I've got one here, and I don't know if I'm even going to look at it too much, is what I want to do today. I might even just pull up the stool and sit here, and it's going to be a lot like we do on Wednesdays. If you haven't been to a Wednesday night, this is a little taste. It's a little different, and I'll explain why. But I just open up the scripture, and I've studied, and I know what I want to say. I have some notes of some things, but I just walk through. We're going through Numbers right now. We just read it and apply it as we read it. And so I'm going to kind of do that with Acts chapter 27 today. And the only difference is on Wednesdays, not only do I point out things, but as we read it, others get to point out things that they see. And there's a lot of, I leave with more information than I came with on Wednesdays. And I enjoy that. I love to preach, but I think the Wednesday nights are becoming one of my favorite times of the week in that Bible study that we have. We just have such a good time. So the way I'm going to preach today is going to feel, if you come on Wednesday nights, it's going to feel a lot like that, okay? And it'd almost be like me to start having comments from the crowd, because that's the way I like to do this. So here we go, Acts chapter 27. And up to this point, what we've been studying through all these chapters, the main character is Paul, and we're talking about what happened to him, and he did this, and they said this to him, and then Paul stood up and said this to them. It's a lot of third-person stuff going on. Who's the author of the book of Acts? Luke. The same guy that wrote the book of Luke wrote the book of Acts. In fact, it could have been 1st Luke and 2nd Luke, because these books really are part 1, part 2 of the same letter written by the same guy to the same people. But that would have taken the focus more onto Luke rather than on the purpose he wrote it, which is the acts of the apostles beyond him and how the Holy Spirit was working through him. Anyway, chapter 27 says, when it was decided that, what's the next word there? Do you see a change? He did this, he went there, they did that to him, and then all of a sudden, when it was decided that what's that mean? Luke is involved now. He's included in this. It's not just what's happening to Paul, but what's happening to Paul and Luke, and we'll see more in a moment. See how important every word of Scripture is? So he's been going through all this mess, but he's not been alone. He's had people with him. In fact, we'll see in a moment how that is. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius. Can you guess how many soldiers a centurion is over? 100. You're good. So we've got the centurion, and he's taken 100 people to make sure, 100 soldiers to make sure that these prisoners get to where they're going. So we've got a pretty good number. Who belong to the imperial regiment. Without going into too much detail, a centurion is over 100. You take 6 centurions and the soldiers underneath them, they called it a cohort. You take 10 of those, and that makes a regiment. So about 6,000 soldiers is who he's a part of. He's part of the imperial regiment. So taking some very important, top-notch 100 soldiers with him. Verse 2, we boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Who's the we? Well, we know it's Luke because he's writing. We know it's Paul because he's telling about the story of Paul. But also it says Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. Well, who is Aristarchus? The Bible mentions him about 5 times. It doesn't tell us much about him. In fact, I think it mentions about 3 or 4 times. But if you go back to Acts, we're not going to turn there, but Acts 16, Paul has a vision to go to Macedonia. And he kind of wrestles with God a little bit about it, wants to go other places, and God says, I want you to go to Macedonia. So he goes to Macedonia. One of the towns in Macedonia is Thessalonica. Chapter 17, Paul goes to Thessalonica. Well, that's where Aristarchus is from. We don't hear about Aristarchus in 16 or 17, but when we get to chapter 19, Paul is now in Ephesus. He leaves Thessalonica and he goes to Ephesus, and there's an uproar. And the whole city, they want to kill Paul. And they drag him into the city. If you remember when I preached on that, the theater that they dragged 2 disciples into, and Paul wanted to go, and everybody told Paul, don't go though, they'll rip you to shreds, they're going to kill you, don't go out there. I had pictures of it because I've been in that theater. When we lived in Romania, we went down into Turkey, into Izmir, which is ancient Ephesus, and I even told you the story of where I led a guy to the Lord in that theater who'd been following us, listening to the biblical stories we went through Ephesus. Great stuff. I love it. This is where we're talking about. Well, the 2 disciples that were dragged in there and Paul wasn't able to go was Gaius and Aristarchus. All right, so this guy, newly saved from the mission of Paul, is on fire. And Paul said, I'm taking you with me. He takes him to Ephesus, and in Ephesus, he's in trouble. Do you understand? Well, fast forward to where we're at. Guess where he's still at? With Paul. Tell you, there are when you have teams of people who love God, they serve well together. I love the people that I work with in this church because they love God. The other pastors, we got Kyle and Kevin, they would do anything for God. And that makes a good team when you've got people that love the Lord. And even Paul, as confident as he was, he needed a team. I could go on with that. I do want to say this. Colossians 4:10, Paul is writing to the church of Colossae, and he writes to them, this is, when he writes to the church of Colossae, he writes to them from the prison that he'll be in Rome after this story. You know, he's on his way to Rome, he gets to Rome, he's under house arrest, and while he's under house arrest, he writes back a couple other of the epistles, and he writes Colossians from prison. And he writes in 4:10, oh, and by the way, Aristarchus, my co-prisoner, sends you greetings. So Aristarchus is going with Paul by choice now and is going to end up in prison with Paul. So these are the kinds of people that we're talking about. Verse 3. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. From there, and that's about the last good news we're going to have in this story for a while. Okay? Julius let Paul go get something because Paul was an upright, honest man. They knew he'd come back to the boat, and so he went and got supplies for the trip and came back, and off they go. Verse 4, it's about to get bad. From there, we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And you might want to, just for fun, underline all the difficulty he's about to face as you go through this. It'll help it stand out to you. The winds were against us, I have underlined in my Bible. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed in Myria and Lycia. There, the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. All right. You know what's in Italy? Little geography here. Rome. All right. So that's the ship that's going to get us there. Or is it? Verse 7. I underlined a lot of this. We made slow headway for many days. And then I underlined, and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus, when the wind did not allow us to hold our course. That's a simple phrase, but can you imagine what it felt like when the wind would not allow you to hold your course? Your course is no longer in your control. You can aim the direction you want to aim, you can fight, but you are not going where you wanted to go. Has life ever felt that way? There's so much in here. Listen, this is a real storm. It is not a mythological storm. It is not just a picture, and it was a real storm. And you're going to see that I believe it was a spiritually designed storm. It was supernatural. And the reason is God is allowing storms a storm, literal storm, into the lives of these people to accomplish certain things. Does God allow storms in your life? If he does, and I know he does, it's the same reason. He has things he wants to accomplish in your life. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salamone. We moved along the coast, here it is again, with difficulty, and came to a place called Fair Havens, which sounds like a nice place, but it was after a long, hard trip. And not a great place to weather the storms. You'll see. Verse 9, much time had been lost. I underline that. Do you see how much is going on here? What's this trip like? It is a bad trip. They're struggling. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. What's the Day of Atonement got to do with it? Is it a spiritual thing? No, they just know that you don't sail after the Day of Atonement. That marks the beginning of winter. You just don't do it until the bad weather's over. But it had gotten bad early. And there was some of them that thought, well, if it got bad early, maybe it will tame down a little bit and we can make it. Bad idea. So here's kind of a key verse starting at the end of verse 9. It says, so Paul warned them. I circled that in my Bible. That is going to come back. We're going to need to see that again. So Paul warned them. Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. You're not just going to lose the boat, and you're not just going to lose the cargo. You can die. Is that a clear warning? But the centurion, instead of listening to Paul, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. The owner of the ship had money. He owned a ship. You know, people tend to believe the advice of celebrities and the wealthy more than the wise. Have you ever noticed that? Sports players, singers, man, they get up and they make political statements and everybody listens, and I got to tell you, they don't know what they're talking about. Now, I'm not turning this into a political conversation. That's not my point. In fact, one of the things I wish I could just stop right here and talk about for the rest of this time is not only do people listen to the celebrities, but verse 12, since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, meaning it wasn't going to be comfortable, they still would have been better there than what they're going to face with. They should have been content with what they had, but no, they wanted more. That's another lesson. But here's the lesson I wish I could spend some time on. It says, the majority decided that we should sail on. The majority decided? Does the majority mean they're right? The majority mocked Noah. What happened to them? The majority grumbled against Moses and Aaron. What happened to them? A whole generation died off in the wilderness. The majority cried, "Crucify him." Broad is the way and wide is the gate that leads to destruction, but narrow is the way and narrow is the gate and straight is the way that leads to everlasting life. I think it was, I hope I don't get this wrong. I think it was Mark Twain that said, if you agree with the majority, at least take time to rethink your position. And I wish I could get this quote right, and I'm not going to get it right, but the essence of it by Booker T. Washington said that the majority never decided what was righteous, never decided what was correct. Said, if the majority, he said something like, if the majority believes in something that is sinful, it doesn't make it righteous. If it believes in something that is wrong, it doesn't make it right. Really good. I should have looked it up, but I don't want to sit on that. I'm going to keep moving. But folks, we're in a day and age where the majority is pushing you to believe them just because they're the majority. In fact, that is the goal behind algorithms on social media. Even when the majority does not believe it, their goal is to make you think the majority believes it. Okay, I'm done. The majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was the harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. So they found a good place they wanted to go to. They had a target. Now watch this. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. And again, though this is a true story, the principles that come out of this, the allegory that it pictures is so apparent to me. Whenever Satan wants to trap you, does he immediately throw you into the danger, or does he make it look good first? He makes it look like it's the easier path. Oh, it's a gentle wind. Why don't you just ride it out? Come along. And as soon as you cut anchor, that wind turns nasty. That is how the devil works. So when a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, or at least they thought they did. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, if I just said that and stopped, what do you think's going to happen in this story? Because we know better. We know what happens. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. How many of you have been caught in hurricane winds? Just a few of you. How long does that usually last, Lisa? You lived in Florida.
It just depends on which hurricane it is. 3 hours that we've been through, my parents and my family have been through 8 hours of 150 miles.
So 3 hours and one up to 8 hours of up to 150 mile an hour winds. Can I just give you a little spoiler alert? Verse 27, on the 14th night. Can you let that sink in? 3 hours was bad, but man, they went through 8 hours. Can you imagine 8 hours of hurricane force? Now, how about 8 hours on the water of a hurricane force? In a boat. But then 8 hours turns into 12. And you can't wait for the next day to break that up. The next day comes and it doesn't break it up. And the second day, and the third day, and the first week, and it's not letting up. Do you understand? Whew. Kind of makes me want to go canoeing. Verse 15, the ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along. Folks, life does get this way. This is picturing life. Sometimes we face things we didn't do. We even tried to go against it. We wanted to go the other way, but life hits us and throws us a certain direction. I'm going to keep going. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. Like it's banging on the ship. And so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. So they're dragging one anchor along to keep them headed one direction and to try to keep from flipping over in the waves. And yet the wind just took them and they're like, don't even try to steer. Just hold this thing together. There are times that we feel that way in life, by the way, where we don't even know which direction to go. It's just, Lord, just don't let me be dragged too far. When we took such a violent battering, verse 18, that from the storm, that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. All right, here's my first major point that I'd like to talk to about the reason God allows storms into your life. Without the cargo, are they getting paid? Nope. But when the storms come, it can cause us to reevaluate our priorities and what's important to us. I mean, they were about to give months or a year of their life to get on this ship and get it all the way over and deliver the goods where it's going and to make their money. But when the storm came, they realized all this stuff isn't going to matter if I die. It caused them to reprioritize in their minds all the stuff. And what they do with it? Just throw it, feed the fish. Because we don't need it. In fact, it keeps going and says in verse 19, on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard. That's the equipment. Some of that's even the hoists that they use to pick up the cargo and put it in. They're like, dismantle that. Now we don't have a hoist to move it. We'll pick it up with your hands. We're getting it off the ship. I mean, we're talking heavy equipment. I need a bunch of guys to stand on that side because we're carrying this over to this side. We don't want to tip the boat, and we're getting rid of this stuff. And they're doing what they can. They're throwing everything overboard. There's a point that a storm, the right kind of storm in your life, can teach you, can narrow your priorities to what really matters. Paul had warned them that they would suffer loss. What's happening? They're suffering loss. There's a point where, and I mean this very tenderly, because I'm talking about things that hit us and we can't control. Life, the problems that hit us, and there's nothing we can do. It overwhelms us. But if we backed up, and if they'd have listened to Paul, could that have been avoided? You see, often we look at the current situation and say, but this is not, I can't control this. There's nothing I can do. But that's because you missed your opportunity. I mean this lovingly, folks. But sometimes we get into these situations where it seems over our head and we blame God. But God had sent a warning and we chose to listen to the advice of the wrong people. Am I speaking truth? We're going to see the importance of what Paul said. The source of his wisdom was God. Where am I at? Verse 20. Oh, here we go. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Who said we gave up hope? Luke. But I thought he's a Christian. They never doubt. You know what? Even a guy like Luke and Aristarchus, when faced with these kind of trials, could say, it looks like God's not going to be bringing a solution. Now, they were okay with that, I believe. If God wants us dead, this is where we die. But they lost hope of surviving. Now, I don't know this. I kind of doubt it. But the question I asked myself when I read that was, does the we include Paul? Or is he speaking on behalf of just everybody else? Because here I just asked the question. You don't find an answer unless you ask the question. Okay, so when I read Scripture, when you read Scripture, you should be asking yourself questions like this all the time as you do it. Even if you don't find a definite answer, I like what I discovered because I asked the question. Okay? And here's what I noticed. It says, they gave up hope of all hope of being saved, verse 20. Now verse 21. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. By the way, it's okay to say, I told you so. I have biblical evidence that it's okay to say, I told you so. Here's the thing, though. It was not in pride that he said, you should have listened to me. Done. He's saying, you should have listened to me, so now listen to me this time. Because he's still looking out for their best interest, not his ego. So, parents, warn your kids, they don't listen to you, they get hurt. It's okay to say, you should have listened to me. I'm not an idiot. Listen to me now. Okay? But let's keep going. You'll see where this is going in a moment. He said, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now, see, there's hope about to be offered. But now I urge you to keep up your courage. This is coming from Paul. And so that makes me think, well, everybody else lost hope. Paul did not. And why did Paul not lose hope? Because he had faith in Jesus Christ. He knew that Jesus Christ was bigger than the storms. Understand what storm I'm talking about. He knew that Jesus Christ is bigger than a hurricane that lasted 14 days. Are you hearing me? And because he believed it, he can now encourage those who had no hope. Christians, this is what we need to be doing right now with the world. Is telling them, I see which way you are going. It's because you've been listening to the wrong advice. We're doing good because we listen to Jesus Christ and we follow the Bible. You should listen to what he says. Try it out. You'll see it works. Be encouraged. We can make it through this. I ain't getting too many amens out of that. Do you believe that to be true? Do you feel confident that God has all this in his control? You better. Then you ought to be able to go to those who feel scared of these times and say, let me encourage you to listen to God. Because that's what Paul says. Watch. He says in verse 22, but now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. All right, now, is this good news or bad news? In this moment for them, is this good news or bad news? Man, it's great news. Would it have been great news when there was that gentle breeze? And they got on the boat, and Paul said, I just want to tell everybody, you're going to make it, but you're going to lose this whole boat and everything on it. Would that have been good news or bad news? It would have been bad news. Same news, but now it's good news. What happened? The storm changed some priorities. I would say it's a well worth it for the lesson. No, we don't like going through storms, but if the storms teach us something about having faith in God, it is well worth it. I keep looking over at my notes, and I have no idea where I'm at there. I'm like, what am I doing? I didn't even say that yet. You guys back there with the notes in the sound booth are like, what's he doing? All right, verse 22. But I urge you to keep your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. Stop right there for a moment. This is where I say I didn't find an answer. When I first had that question, did Paul start to lose hope? I see him encouraging them, and I'm thinking, no, he didn't lose hope because he's got faith. But then I see in certain times when it would appear to be hopeless, the angel of the Lord would stand next to Paul and tell him things. And so I'm like, well, I don't know, like, why did the angel of the Lord have to come and talk to him that night? Was it to say, Paul, don't give up? Now, what we're going to see in a moment is that the angel reconfirms what he'd already told him before, where he said, as you have testified of me in Jerusalem, so you will do in Rome. And so he's kind of at that point, I said, this begins a process for him where he knows they can't kill me. I'm safe until I testify in Rome. And so the angel of the Lord comes and tells him again what he already knew. Are you hearing me? Why would he do that And I start to wonder, is it because he started to lose hope? Like, I don't know how we're going to get through this. But his immediate response from that to say, hey guys, guess what? Don't be scared. What do you mean don't be scared? 14 days, we're still in a storm. We have no food, like we're in trouble. No. But my God told me we're going to be okay. In order for him to have that kind of faith, I don't see him doubting it the night before. So what's the answer? I don't know. I can tell you this, Paul's a man of faith. And whether it was because he started to doubt or because he didn't doubt, either one, the Lord stood beside him and said, I'm with you. When you draw close to Jesus, he draws close to you. Verse 23, last night an angel of God whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. Who's Paul telling this to? I mean, he's not just telling us. Well, a little side note, God told me I'm still getting to Caesar. Who's he telling this to? 100 soldiers, a centurion, sailors, and other prisoners. In front of all of them, he's saying, look, my God told me I'm making it all the way to Rome. So if you want to make it, stand by me because I'm making it. Are you seeing it? Kyle, do you see that? And this is where there's so much going on in this verse that I wish I could do 27 to the end of the chapter where it talks about the shipwreck. And we'll do that probably soon. But here's what he says. Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. Okay, that's good for you, Paul, but what about us? And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. I'm on his boat. Not only did the storm change the priorities of material possessions, the storm caused them to change who they listened to. Often, we go through storms because we listen to the wrong advice. When we recognize that and say, I should have listened to better advice, listen, they made their choice. They lost their stuff. They went through the storm, and yet God gave them a way of deliverance because that's who God is. He says, so keep up your courage, men. For I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. Yeah, we're going to get shipwrecked. We're going to lose the boat. And we're going to have to make for shore. Now, sneak peek for next week. Or whenever I do this. I think I'm going to do it next week. Next week is Mother's Day. I think what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time honoring mothers, and I'm going to get back to this story. I don't want to wait too long. So this is a good story. But there are people that didn't listen that are still not going to, some try not to listen. Some are going to try to get out on their own boat and get away, which would leave others dead. And all of a sudden, everybody's listening to Paul. Why are they listening to Paul? Because Paul's smart? Because Paul proved that thank you so much. Paul proved that he is following God. If Paul had just been, listen, guys, I've sailed before. Let me tell you about the storms I've been in. You should listen to me. It would have meant nothing. It's not what he did. He said, listen, you should be listening to me because I am following the one true God. Folks, if we really want to make a difference in the lives of our family and friends around us, we need to live in such a way that they would go, yeah, they live differently than I do. They follow their God. And you know what? I don't like the way they follow their God. I don't want to do it. I'm going to do what my buddies and pals tell me to do instead. Fine. Paul didn't argue with them. He's like, okay, here's your cool breeze. Are you hearing me? He didn't buy in to what they were doing. He didn't get sucked into their attitude. He's like, all right, you guys go ahead and do that. I'm going to start praying for you. All right, you can pray for me if you want. It's a nice cool breeze. We're going to be okay. And he doesn't on the first day of the storm say, aha, see, I told you. He waits till they're without hope. And he says, I still have hope. I can encourage you if you're ready to listen to me. And not because I'm me, but because I'm listening to God. Wouldn't that make a difference?